No,
Okay. Yes,
I
sir.
don't see.
Dick Ritchie, Department of Peace Studies at the University of Glasgow. It's clear that key to the process of moving up towards the mountain is one of building strategic reassurance between the United States, Russia and China. So I'd like your views on how you think, over the longer term, strategic reassurance can be built at a deep political level, particularly with China. How we can overcome what's been called the bureaucratization of homicide that still seems to persist 20 years after the Cold War. Thank you.
Maybe we should hold this one for Henry Kissinger. He just wrote his book on China, and he'll be here tomorrow morning. But I would say we need to keep China informed. We need to have a dialogue with them. We need to keep them informed of, even though U.S. and Russia have 90% of the nuclear weapons, we have a responsibility in that respect. We're unique in that respect. China is a nuclear power, and we need to get them involved in protecting nuclear materials around the globe. We, right now, our foundation, for instance, has got an international advisory board. We're creating a scorecard on nuclear materials and how well countries that went to the summit conference, even those who didn't go, are basically doing on protecting nuclear materials. We have a Chinese scientist on that international panel, and that's an NGO effort, but we've got the Economist magazine, Economist Research Group doing the scorekeeping, and we have an international panel on that, so we'll have a yearly score about how we're doing on protecting nuclear materials starting in October. That's just one example of keeping the Chinese informed. The Chinese historically, I haven't been briefed on it lately, but historically have not had their weapons in a hair-trigger posture, and I'm hoping they do not. The United States and Russia need to move away from the posture we're in now, where we have thousands of weapons that could be shot in an hour, hour and a half. If we both moved away from that posture, and it would take some work and take some creativity, if we both moved away from that posture, nuclear weapons would become less relevant. You wouldn't have done away with them immediately, but you would have made a big difference in the psychology. We've got to have that kind of discussion. And if we can have it with Russia, we need to also have it with China. So China's got to play a big role in this, and we need to keep the Chinese informed. On missile defense, if we are able to get cooperation with Russia, I think it ought to be an open-ended type system. We couldn't involve China now, it'd be too complicated to do, but we ought to make it clear that they could be part of this system too, because the first thing we're trying to tackle is defenses against short-range intermediate missiles. And the INF Treaty, which George Shultz under President Reagan led, we and Russia abolished that class of missiles, so we're protecting against those. And for other countries who are willing to give up those missiles, they ought to be able to come into the missile defense picture. Now, this has all got to take a lot of work. It's not going to be easy. But we are. I just spent 2 days in NATO, and they are working very hard on this question of missile defense with Russia. There'll be obstacles, it'll be tough, but it would be a game changer if we were able to create that psychology. And it could be some lessons learned with India and Pakistan there. You know, the U.S. and Russia went through Soviet Union then, went through the Cold War. Our military people, led by people with the wisdom of Bill Perry, they did a great job. And the Soviet military people were careful, they were professional with their way they handled nuclear weapons. But we were also lucky. We were very lucky. We had a lot of close calls. Deterrence, in some limited sense, as Bill said, worked in that sense. But if deterrence had failed, you know, God's universe was at stake. That is not a posture we ought to want gladly to pass down to our children and grandchildren. We've got to figure out how to dismount this tiger. It won't be easy. The Russians have got to do it too, and the Chinese have to be part of that.
I think it's, I don't ever foresee the day when the United States and China would become allies. But I think it's very clear that it's in the best interest of both countries to remain friends and to cooperate. And I believe the leaders of both of our countries see it that way. I do have to observe that you should never underestimate the ability of a country to act against its own best interests. That has happened in history. But the odds are against it now, and I think very clearly the leaders of both of our countries are not inclined to do that, and we will find ways of working together quietly and peacefully, but never approaching the point of an alliance.
Let me add, agreeing with what Sam and Bill have said, but pointing out that China 10 or 15 years from now is not going to look the same as it does now. China, for the last 25 years, has had a very rapid rate of increase in its labor force, and a decrease in the number of people the labor force has been supporting, the so-called demographic dividend. As their one-child policy, now some 30 years old, those people hit older ages. I think within maybe a year or two, that rapid rate of increase in the labor force is going to level off. This is the labor pool. And only a few years after that, like 4 or 5, so this is very short term, it'll start going down. The difference between this and this is gigantic. Now, I know there's a lot of underemployment in China, so it won't have as crisp an effect, but the effect will be there. Furthermore, their very rapid rise in productivity is caused by the movement of people from rural to urban areas. And that has not run its course, but they probably skimmed the cream off of that. You remember, your rate of increase in GDP is the sum of the rate of increase in your labor force plus the rate of increase in your productivity. So I think there's going to be a change. And it's also striking how sensitive the Chinese government is right now to what's going on in the Middle East. They're very leery about the slightest little dissent of any kind. And that's not a healthy situation to be in that posture. So they may see something to cause them to shift their gears. So I don't think this notion, it was like when Japan was rising, everybody said, well, Japan's got the future, that's it. You wouldn't say that today. Part of the reason is demographic. And the demographic influences in China are there very visibly and right there for all to see.
One other comment about China and technology. China has embraced modern technology, including communication technology, including internet technology. At the same time, it has tried to control how the internet can get information to its people, which in my judgment is a long-term losing battle. They have been terrorized by what they saw in the Middle East revolution, by the role that the social networks and technology played in that. And they're right now operating on very uncertain and very dangerous ground because they want to have it both ways. They want to keep China leader in technology, all this internet technology. On the other hand, they want to keep the social networks from influencing their own thinking of their own young people. And they cannot square that circle, in my view. So this is a very tough problem. It's a big problem ahead of them. I don't know how it's going to come out, but it's going to be a big problem for the Chinese government.